It's an old cliche to say that once upon a time, not too long ago, video games were more challenging. That they never used to hold your hand, or that they would let the player simply get on with it, and any mistake you made would be punished. On average, at least if you compare the mainstream titles of the 8-bit era to those now, that may well be true. But it is a bit of an oversimplification that actually doesn't necessarily reflect well on the games of yesteryear. Simply saying that they were hard, that those were the days when games were games, it softens the impact of what they were actually trying to do, and homogenises them into one big lump. Not that there's much wrong with saying it. If for whatever reason we happen to be in a drinking hole together and you say, "Man, games aren't what they used to be," well, I'm probably not going to launch into an insanely boring analysis of why old games are hard while you gaze longingly at your mobile phone. But this is my YouTube channel, where you damn well expect that sort of thing, and damn it, I ain't gonna disappoint. Looking at those games of yore, those hard NES games, your Mega Mans, Castlevania 3's, Journey to Silius, they're all challenging, but all for different reasons. Capcom's Mega Man games are mostly for slow, considerate players. You're expected to recognise complex patterns, and you're even given time to contemplate your next move. It's worth noting that unlike the majority of old-school platform games, Mega Man does not and never has featured a time limit. When you get hit in a Mega Man game, it's usually because you were in a bit too much of a rush, if you'll pardon the pun. As challenging as the games are, they're very fair and any hit you take is pretty much always your fault. Something like Konami's Castlevania, on the other hand, is a bit less slow-paced but still throws plenty of barriers in your way. Some of the game's more infamous challenges, like the flying Medusa heads, are actually best taken on by simply rushing forward as fast as you can. If you stop, you're probably going to take a hit. Although naturally it's not always going to be so simple. Barriers and shit. Castlevania is also a lot more intimate than something like Mega Man. You've got to try your luck, you need to get in close with the whip in order to take out enemies and advance through the game. And so in the end it's more of a balance. Some parts of the game are fast and others are slow. But then there's the game, or the trilogy of games, that I'm looking at today. A series that quite simply threw the book out the window when it came to difficulty. Games that stand out totally from the pack. If I want to illustrate the subtle differences between these hard old games, I need look no further than Tecmo's Ninja Gaiden. Arriving on the NES in 1989, having been fathered by a thoroughly mediocre arcade beat-em-up, Ninja Gaiden is, like most arcade ports on the NES, a completely different game and basically not a port at all. And of course it's a much better game. Ninja Gaiden's famous for quite a lot of reasons, some of which you probably think I don't really need to go into. I barely need to mention how the game took the important step of tying all of these disparate gameplay levels into a narrative complete with cutscenes that were frankly mind-boggling at the time. Is it worth me mentioning once again that it's one of the most revered series of action games ever made, so much so that the successful 3D rebirth of the series was treated like Jimi Hendrix descending from the skies playing a machine gun on a solid gold Fender Strat? And do I really need to tell you that it's hard? Harder than virtually all of the games previously mentioned by a factor of 10? Well, I kinda do, because that's one of the vid's main points, but Ninja Gaiden is hard in a very special way, and that particular challenge, amongst many other things, makes it one of my favourite ever platform games. Ninja Gaiden is pretty much the opposite of Mega Man. Simply put, one must go fast. Hideo Yoshizawa designed the game in such a way that makes this totally necessary. If you stop and try to take your time to kill an enemy, chances are they'll respawn immediately. The game simply doesn't allow you to take a backward step. The excellent cutscenes do perform well as a carrot dangled in front of your face, urging you onward to the next act, but the game actually wants you to play as and feel like a ninja all the time, meaning you've got to be speedy and you always have to move forward. Figuring this out does help with the game, at least a little bit. Naturally, it's still a brutal game regardless of that, but it's so very satisfying when you get it right. Playing Ninja Gaiden well is, in fact, almost like mastering a difficult piece of music. It's that same process where you have to almost break a stage down into its individual parts and learn it bit by bit. It's not so much about losing and winning. Unlike most people, I don't consider Ninja Gaiden to be a particularly unfair game. An unfair game to me is something that constantly throws silly curveballs at you, things that you couldn't reasonably expect to happen at any other point, and that don't jive with how the main bulk of the game plays. Ninja Gaiden is at least consistent. Every stage is going to require you to be ever faster and ever more precise, and if you make a mistake, you'll be punished dearly for it because, essentially, you've lost your rhythm. And once you lose that, it's pretty difficult to get it back. You have to expect that no, you're not simply going to be able to get through the game in a couple of goes. It's going to take some time. But you know, it's always something that I feel is worth persevering with in the end, because when everything goes right, the game flows like no other game of the entire era. In fact, I can't really think of many other action games that flow as well as this one does at its peak, and that feeling always makes the game worth playing. Unlike most games, you actually feel something of a real sense of accomplishment when you finally manage to just rip through an act. It's magical. And of course, speaking of music, oh boy, what a soundtrack, huh? It certainly fits the game well. There's suitably slow and dramatic music for all those cutscenes, but it's the in-game music that stands out, the fast bass and insistent melodies, once again always urging you to move forward. The only real regret is that some of the tunes do repeat on stages, but with music this good, it's not exactly a massive complaint. And hey, the in-game graphics are pretty solid too. The game has a very subtle horror vibe, a little bit of Lovecraft thrown into the mix that's certainly worth noting, particularly when you get to some of the game's biggest monsters and eldritch abominations. And of course the cutscenes, well, they're superb. The actual story is kinda sorta hilarious in how poor old Ryu Hayabusa tends to look like a bit of a donkey at every turn, but basically no one else was doing anything like this at the time, and it was very influential. On the whole, the game deserves every last bit of the success it got and the praise it gets. Some may want to slap Hideo Yoshizawa for making the game this way, but well, they'd probably hug him afterwards. I hope so anyway. It's a definite favourite of mine, one of those NES games that Sega bods like me just wish we'd had. And before you say anything, the Master System game, that's not anything compared. Anyhow, we also have two sequels to cover. Ninja Gaiden 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos came first, and hey, it delivers more of the same, in the main. There's a few little tweaks here and there. The respawn rate isn't quite so unforgiving this time around, for example, but in the main it's more Ninja Gaiden fun. The cutscenes, the music, the graphics, all first rate and all very consistent with the original. The main thing that has been added this time around is a lot more environmental dangers. In Stage 2, for example, you have to battle against an ever-changing wind, and Stage 3 features frequent bouts of darkness where you can't see a bloody fin. Now I don't know how to feel about these fins really, because they certainly make for a bigger challenge, but I don't think they quite gel with what the game's trying to go for. You have to stop moving a lot of the time to get past these hazards, and I don't want to stop moving. On the whole though, still a damn good game. It's more Ninja Gaiden and, hey, there's now one with that. Ninja Gaiden 3, The Ancient Ship of Doom is, well, it's different. Again, it's still a good game, but it's not quite the same. There was a change at the wheel. Lead designer Hideo Yoshizawa was replaced by Masato Kato, who removed the Lovecraftian feel of the first two games and went for more of a science fiction angle, which still works, mind you. Funnily enough, the game was actually designed to be a lot more forgiving, to be a Ninja Gaiden game that more people would feel up to playing. Not that you would know that from the game's Western release. In a rather odd twist from the norm, where the Japanese games are usually a great deal harder, Tecmo gave the West an incredibly tough game that they thought the people would want, what they expected out of the series. However, they increased the difficulty in a very artificial way. Enemies take more hits and do more damage, you get sent back to the beginning of the act when you die, not the stage, and there are criminally limited continues. So basically, Tecmo managed to totally botch the Western release of the game. If you're going to play this one, then for heaven's sake play the original Famicom version, because that's how it's meant to be. Everything I say from here on out is based on the Japanese game. Gameplay-wise, Ninja Gaiden 3 is completely different from the first two. It is a lot more forgiving. Ryu isn't knocked back so far when he gets hit, and crucially, enemies do not respawn. You can, if you wish, take your time with the enemies in this game without a great deal of fear of them coming back. Mind you, this is all relative to the first 2 games. It's easy compared to Lowe's and Lowe's alone. It's still a tough son of a bitch in all other cases. The environmental hazards stick around from the second game, but they make more sense here because the gameplay is so different, it's much slower. And the game also features a frickin' ice level, the bane of just about any player's existence, and I'm sure you can guess that an ice level in a Ninja Gaiden game is no picnic. We'll also get some new abilities, such as being able to hand from platforms. Useful at points, but you can bet your ass there's going to be big challenges associated with that skill. Ninja Gaiden 3 is pretty good on the whole, although relaxed in the level of difficulty does make it feel a bit more like a normal action platformer. It doesn't feel the same as the first 2 games. Having said that, it's still one of the best action platformers you can get on the NES, knocking most other efforts into a cocked hat. It's excellent, and probably my second favourite game in the series after the first. Just don't play the Western version. Sure, you may lose out on the game's utterly incredibly terrible story, but yeah, I think you can probably live with that. And so that concludes our brief look at one of the best trilogies of action games ever made. And hey, although this channel doesn't usually cover much in the way of NES or SNES games, it's nice to see how the other half lived every once in a while. We Europeans may have never been able to experience these games properly, what with the awful slow motion graphics and down-tuned music us PAL folks had come to expect. Nor did we even get the first Ninja Gaiden game until 1991, the second came out as late as 1994, and the third hit the shelves in 1990 absolutely frickin' never. But nowadays we can see just what the hell everyone was going on about, and it was, and remains, bloody good. People may have covered Ninja Gaiden tons of times over already, but hell, it just had to be done again. Forget what you hear about the game being unfair or frustrating or whatever. If you want the blueprint for a unique, landmark action title, not to mention a whole trilogy of fan-bloody-tastic games, you go here. These games are the kins, and they've barely been toppled since. And with that, it's time to end the video. Thanks for watching, and wherever you are, whoever you be, have a good one, take care, and I'll see you next time. If you like what you just saw, and I bloody well hope you did, then please do appreciate accordingly using that little like button. And hey, there's more videos there if you want to watch them, and if you really like what I'm doing, then please do subscribe.